I'm Amanda Wilson, 32, and I never thought I'd be the one to bring my father to his knees in a courtroom. Growing up, Dad was my hero, successful attorney, community pillar, perfect husband to Mom. When she died suddenly last year, everything changed. Dad remarried within months to Bethany, his much younger secretary, and systematically began erasing Mom from our lives. But when he sued for control of Mom's family estate that was rightfully mine, claiming I was mentally unfit, I knew I had to fight back. What he didn't know, Mom had entrusted me with information that would destroy his carefully crafted reputation forever. I'm still processing everything that happened in that courtroom. Before I dive into this wild family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments. It always amazes me how these family betrayal stories connect people from everywhere. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe to join our community of survivors who've faced family betrayal and come out stronger. Now, let's get into how my perfect father's mask finally shattered. I grew up in Brookline, an affluent suburb just outside Boston, where my father, James Wilson, was practically royalty in legal circles. At 59, he was still as imposing and meticulous as ever, senior partner at Wilson and Barnes, the firm he co-founded 30 years ago, specializing in corporate law and high-profile estate disputes. The irony doesn't escape me now. Mom, Laura Wilson, was the heart of our family and deeply involved in the community. At 56, she ran charity auctions, organized fundraisers for the Children's Hospital, and somehow managed to make our house feel like the warm center of the universe. Everyone loved her. She had this way of making people feel truly seen. Our family dynamic was what you'd expect in an upper-middle-class New England household. Dad worked long hours building his practice, while Mom raised me and maintained our social connections. Dad was strict but not unkind. I remember how proud he looked at my high school graduation, college commencement, and when I landed my job as a curator at the Boston Historical Society. His approval meant everything to me. Mom came from old money, not obscenely wealthy, but comfortable for generations. The crown jewel was Willow Creek, a historic property about an hour outside Boston that had been in her family since the 1882. The colonial-style main house with its wraparound porch, the ancient willow trees that gave the property its name, the small apple orchard, it was magical. I spent every summer there with my grandparents until they passed when I was in college. Dad had a completely different background. He grew up in South Boston, worked his way through state college and law school on scholarships and part-time jobs. He met Mom at a charity gala where he was doing pro bono legal work. He always seemed both proud of his rise from humble beginnings and slightly insecure around Mom's family friends. 2 years before Mom died, she started having dizzy spells. The doctors initially thought it was inner ear problems, then stress, then possibly early menopause symptoms. No one suspected a heart condition until it was too late. During those 2 years, Dad seemed devoted. He drove her to appointments, hired help around the house, and cut back his hours at the firm. At least that's what he told us. During Mom's final months, she became strangely insistent on having private conversations with me. She'd wave Dad out of the room, saying she needed girl talk with her daughter. He'd look annoyed but comply. During these talks, Mom would often reminisce about Willow Creek, making me promise to preserve it. Family legacy matters, she'd say, but integrity matters more. 3 days before she died, Mom gave me a safety deposit box key. "Only use this if you absolutely need to," she whispered. "I pray you never have to." I assumed it contained jewelry or family documents and promised to keep it safe. I had no idea how crucial that key would become. After Mom's funeral, Dad changed. The warmth and patience vanished. He threw himself into work, staying at the office until midnight, barely acknowledging me when I visited. I attributed it to grief we all process differently. Then Bethany Parker entered the picture. Or rather, I realized she'd been in the picture all along. Bethany was 28, Dad's legal secretary for the past 3 years. Tall, blonde, ambitious. Mom had mentioned her a few times with slight unease, but nothing serious. Just 2 months after Mom's funeral, Dad announced they were engaged. No warning, no discussion, just a cold statement of fact over a tense dinner. James, don't you think this is a bit sudden? I'd asked carefully. When you get to my age, Amanda, you realize time is precious, he'd replied, not meeting my eyes. Bethany understands me. The implication being that I didn't, that Mom hadn't. They married at the courthouse a month later. No family present, not me, not Dad's brother from Chicago, not even Bethany's parents. Just colleagues from the firm as witnesses. I tried to be supportive despite my reservations. Dad was grieving, I reasoned. People make impulsive decisions during grief. But then, things got worse. Bethany moved into our family home and systematically began erasing Mom. Her paintings were replaced with modern art. Her carefully tended garden was ripped out for a hot tub installation. Her books, first editions she'd collected for years, were boxed and donated without my knowledge. When I objected, Dad grew hostile. This is our home now, Amanda. Bethany deserves a fresh start without living in Laura's shadow. Laura. Not your mother, not my late wife, just Laura, suddenly a stranger. The breaking point came when I visited 6 months after Mom's death and discovered her antique jewelry collection missing. These were family heirlooms, some dating back 4 generations. Where's Mom's jewelry? I demanded. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Bethany had them reset into pieces she'll actually wear. No point letting them sit in a box. When I exploded with anger, Dad gave me an ultimatum I'll never forget. Either you accept Bethany as your new mother and stop living in the past, or you stay away from this house and our lives. Mother. Bethany was 3 years older than me. The audacity of his statement left me speechless. I left that day and didn't return to my childhood home for months. I grieved my father while he was still alive, realizing the man I admired had either never existed or had died alongside Mom. Exactly 11 months after Mom's death, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. I recognized the return address as belonging to Helen Parker, Mom's longtime estate attorney, no relation to Bethany, thankfully. The letter was brief but life-changing. Mom had updated her will 6 months before her death, designating me as the sole heir to Willow Creek upon her passing. The property, valued at $4.2 million due to its historical significance and prime location, was now legally mine. I sat on my couch reading the letter over and over, tears streaming down my face. Mom knew. Somehow, she knew Dad would remarry quickly. The trust documentation specified that ownership transferred to me immediately upon her death, with a clause that explicitly excluded James Wilson from any claim to the property if he remarried within 1 year of Laura's passing. My phone rang just 2 hours after I received the letter. Dad, we need to discuss your mother's estate, he said without preamble. His voice was cold, businesslike. Hello to you too, Dad, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't a social call, Amanda. Dinner tomorrow at Morton's, 7 p.m. Bethany and I will meet you there. He hung up before I could respond. Morton's Steakhouse was Dad's power restaurant, where he took important clients to close deals. I arrived exactly on time to find them already seated at his usual corner table, Bethany draped in what I recognized as Mom's remodeled sapphire necklace. My stomach turned. Amanda. Dad nodded as I sat down. No hug, no kiss on the cheek. Bethany offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad didn't waste time on pleasantries. I assume you've heard from Helen about Willow Creek. I nodded, taking a sip of water to steady myself. That property should have come to me, he continued. I spent 30 years of my life with your mother. I built our family fortune while she played lady of the manor. The casual cruelty in his dismissal of Mom's contributions stunned me. Mom's family owned that property for generations before you even met her, I said quietly. And I maintained it with my money for decades, he snapped back. Your mother wasn't thinking clearly when she updated that will. She was medicated, confused. She seemed perfectly lucid to me, I countered. Bethany chose that moment to interject. James has been so heartbroken over this betrayal, she said, placing her hand over his. After everything he did for Laura during her illness. I noticed she wore Mom's engagement ring, resized to fit her slender finger. What exactly do you want, Dad? I asked directly. What's rightfully mine. I've already contested the will. The firm's top estate attorney is handling it personally. My blood ran cold. You're suing me? I'm correcting an injustice, he replied calmly. Laura was not of sound mind when she made those changes. We have medical records proving she was on strong medication. And frankly, Amanda, your own behavior since her death hasn't demonstrated sound judgment either. The threat was clear. He would claim Mom was incompetent, and possibly try to prove I was as well. Dad knew every legal maneuver, every judge, every loophole. You might want to settle now, Bethany suggested with fake sweetness. Things could get complicated. I left dinner in a daze, drove straight to my apartment, and pulled out Mom's safety deposit box key from where I'd hidden it in my grandfather's old pocket watch case. The next morning, I went to the county records office and spent hours researching the original trust documents for Willow Creek. The property had been placed in a family trust in 1922 to protect it from a great-grandfather's gambling debts. The legal structure was complex, but clear the property was meant to stay with blood relatives of the Mercer family, Mom's maiden name. Next, I called Helen Parker, who agreed to meet me immediately. Helen was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, with a no-nonsense bob and sensible shoes. She'd been Mom's friend since law school. I've been expecting your call, she said as I settled into her office. Your father's legal team contacted me yesterday. Rather aggressive approach. He's contesting the will, I confirmed. Helen nodded grimly. Your mother anticipated this. That's why she was so careful about documenting her mental competency when she made the changes. We had independent medical evaluation, videotaped the signing, everything by the book. Why didn't she tell me she was doing this? Helen's expression softened. Laura didn't want to burden you with knowledge of potential conflict. She hoped James would respect her wishes. Did she say why she made the change? I asked. Helen hesitated. Attorney-client privilege limits what I can share, but I'll say this. Your mother made these arrangements after a great deal of reflection. She mentioned contingency documentation that would explain everything if needed. I told her about the safety deposit box key. That sounds like Laura, Helen nodded. Always prepared. As I was leaving, Helen added, Amanda, your father is a powerful attorney with significant resources. This won't be easy. My phone had 17 missed calls and 5 voicemails from Dad by the time I left Helen's office. Each message was more threatening than the last. You're making a serious mistake. This can still be resolved as a family. Don't force my hand, Amanda. You have no idea what you're getting into. Last chance before this gets ugly. The bank where Mom had her safety deposit box was across town. The process was straightforward identification, signatures, the key. The box itself was small, containing only a sealed manila envelope with my name written in Mom's elegant handwriting. Across the front, in bold red letters, open only if James contests the will. I stared at it, heart pounding. Whatever was inside had been important enough for Mom to hide, yet dangerous enough that she hoped it would never be needed. My best friend Rachel urged caution when I called her that evening. This is already getting nasty, she said. You need a lawyer before you open that envelope. Someone who isn't afraid to go up against your dad. She was right. The next day, I contacted Michael Donovan, a former classmate of Helen's known for taking on difficult contested will cases. He agreed to meet immediately. Before I could even visit Michael's office, I received notice that Dad's legal team had filed for an emergency injunction preventing me from accessing Willow Creek or making any changes to the property, claiming risk of irreparable damage to contested assets. The battle had officially begun. The preliminary hearing for Dad's emergency injunction took place on a rainy Tuesday in Suffolk County Court. I arrived with Michael Donovan, who exuded quiet competence in his charcoal suit. Dad and Bethany were already seated at the plaintiff's table. alongside Bradley Stevens, Dad's firm's most aggressive litigator. Dad didn't acknowledge me when I entered. Bethany gave me a small, satisfied smile. Judge Eleanor Blackwell entered the courtroom with a brisk efficiency that matched her reputation. In her mid-60s with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, she was known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for theatrical legal tactics. Dad had never argued before her. His specialty was corporate law, not family court, but Bradley Stevens knew her well. Your Honor, Stevens began after preliminaries, we seek temporary restraining order preventing Miss Wilson from accessing or altering the property known as Willow Creek, pending resolution of the contested will. My client has serious concerns about both the circumstances under which his late wife altered her will and his daughter's stability and judgment. I felt a flush of anger and embarrassment as Stevens continued, painting me as an emotionally unstable, resentful daughter unable to accept Dad's new marriage. Miss Wilson has demonstrated erratic behavior since her mother's passing, Stevens claimed. She's made hostile statements regarding Mr. Wilson's new wife, refused family counseling, and shown signs of financial irresponsibility that raise concerns about her ability to maintain a historical property of this value. Michael squeezed my arm gently, a reminder to maintain my composure. We have a witness who can speak to Miss Wilson's emotional state, Your Honor, Stevens continued. To my shock, Thomas Phillips, my ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago, was called to the stand. We'd dated for 8 months before an amicable breakup due to career differences. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Thomas testified that during our relationship, I'd been emotionally volatile, obsessively attached to my mother, and irrationally suspicious of my father. Every disagreement we'd ever had was twisted into evidence of my instability. When Michael cross-examined him, the truth emerged. Mr. Phillips, when did you begin working at Wilson and Barnes? Michael asked. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. About 2 months ago. And before Mr. Wilson offered you this position, when had you last spoken to him? I hadn't, not directly. So after 3 years of no contact, you suddenly received a job offer from your ex-girlfriend's father, and now you're testifying against her. Interesting timing. Thomas couldn't meet my eyes as he stepped down. Despite Michael's effective cross-examination, Judge Blackwell granted the temporary injunction, standard procedure until the full hearing. I couldn't access Willow Creek until the case was resolved. At Michael's office afterward, we strategized over coffee and legal pads. Your father is playing hardball, Michael observed. Bringing in your ex-boyfriend was a cheap shot, but effective for creating doubt about your emotional state. He'll do worse, I said quietly. You don't know how ruthless he can be when he wants something. Then we need every advantage. Tell me about this envelope from your mother. I'd brought it with me, still sealed. I'm scared of what's inside, I admitted. Michael nodded sympathetically. Based on everything you've told me, your mother went to extraordinary lengths to protect this information. Whatever it is, she believed it might be necessary someday. With shaking hands, I broke the seal. The contents made my blood run cold. Mom had meticulously documented Dad's financial misdeeds over nearly 15 years. Bank statements showing transfers from his firm's client trust accounts to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Photos of Dad meeting with unknown men in parking garages. Receipts for purchases far beyond our family's considerable but not unlimited means. A letter in Mom's handwriting explained everything. My dearest Amanda, if you're reading this, your father has chosen greed over honor once again. I discovered his embezzlement accidentally 7 years ago when I was organizing his home office. At first, I confronted him, ready to leave. He broke down, swore it was a one-time mistake, begged forgiveness. I stayed to protect our family name, his career, and yes, our lifestyle. I told myself it was a momentary weakness. I was wrong, the theft continued. Each time I discovered more, there were new promises, new excuses. When my diagnosis came, I realized I could no longer protect him from the consequences of his actions. This property is your birthright, not compensation for his legal firm to hide further misdeeds. I'm sorry to burden you with this knowledge. Use it only if absolutely necessary. All my love. Mom. Michael reviewed the documents with growing concern. Amanda, this isn't just evidence for a will contest. This is evidence of serious financial crimes. I never knew, I whispered. All those years, while he was lecturing me about integrity, we have a difficult decision, Michael said gently. Using this means destroying your father's career and reputation, possibly sending him to prison. Is that what you want? Was it? Part of me wanted revenge for his betrayal of Mom, of me, of everything our family supposedly stood for. Another part recoiled at the thought of being responsible for my father's downfall, no matter how deserved. Let's hold this in reserve, I finally decided. Maybe he'll drop the case if we show him what we have. But Dad didn't give us the chance. The very next day, his team filed a petition for conservatorship, claiming I was psychologically unfit to manage my affairs or inheritance. They requested an immediate court-ordered psychological evaluation. The evaluation was scheduled for the following week with a court-appointed psychiatrist. I spent the intervening days in a state of panic. What if Dad had somehow influenced this doctor too? What if my legitimate anger and grief were twisted into symptoms of instability? Dr. Freeman, the psychiatrist, was refreshingly straightforward. Miss Wilson, I've been doing these evaluations for 27 years. I'm not interested in family drama, just clinical observations. After 3 hours of assessments, she concluded I was well within normal psychological parameters, demonstrating appropriate emotional responses to significant life stressors and loss. Her report specifically noted no evidence of decision-making impairment or psychological conditions warranting legal intervention. Dad's team pivoted immediately, demanding extensive discovery of my personal records, medical history, therapy notes, financial statements, even my work performance reviews. Their fishing expedition felt like a violation, picking through every aspect of my life, searching for weaknesses. During my deposition, Bradley Stevens asked deeply personal questions about my relationship history, drinking habits, and even therapy discussions about my childhood. Each time Michael objected, Stevens would claim the questions were relevant to establishing my pattern of judgment. Throughout it all, Bethany sat beside Dad, performing the role of concerned stepmother, occasionally whispering in his ear and shooting me triumphant looks when Stevens landed a particularly humiliating line of questioning. Tell me about your relationship with your mother, Stevens pressed during hour 4 of the deposition. Would you characterize it as unusually dependent? I would characterize it as loving and supportive, I replied evenly. Did you resent your father's professional success and the time it took him away from family? I was proud of my father's career, I said truthfully. I used to be, anyway. Miss Wilson, Stevens leaned forward. Isn't this entire legal battle simply an attempt to punish your father for moving on after your mother's death? No, I replied, looking directly at Dad. This is about honoring my mother's wishes and protecting her family legacy. For just a moment, Dad looked away first. By the 3rd month of litigation, I barely recognized my life. The case consumed everything: my time, my energy, my savings, my relationships. Each court appearance required extensive preparation, followed by exhausting debriefing sessions. The legal bills mounted despite Michael's reasonable rates and payment plan. The night before our key motion hearing, I had my 4th anxiety attack in 2 weeks. Sitting on my bathroom floor at 3 a.m., trying to remember how to breathe while my heart hammered against my ribs, I wondered if any property was worth this. Rachel found me there when she came over after my desperate text. She'd been my rock throughout this ordeal, letting me crash at her place when I couldn't face being alone, listening to my endless case updates, bringing groceries when I forgot to eat. Maybe I should just settle, I whispered as she handed me a glass of water. Give him half the property and end this. Is that what your mom would want? Rachel asked gently. The question hung in the air between us. Mom had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect Willow Creek for me, knowing exactly what Dad might do. My museum job had become collateral damage. I'd taken a leave of absence when I couldn't focus on authenticating historical documents while my own family history was being rewritten in court. My boss was understanding but had limits. The position can't stay open indefinitely, Amanda, she'd warned. Most of my friends had slowly withdrawn, uncomfortable with the family drama or unwilling to be associated with a public legal battle against a prominent attorney. Social invitations dwindled. Conversations grew awkward when people asked what was new in my life. Oh, just trying to prove I'm not mentally unstable while fighting my father for my inheritance. How's your sourdough starter coming along? The isolation grew worse when my apartment was broken into while I was at a court hearing. Nothing valuable was taken, not my laptop, TV, or jewelry, but my files were clearly rifled through, desk drawers left open, papers scattered. The building's security camera caught a clear image of a man who looked remarkably like Bethany's brother, entering with a key card he shouldn't have had. When I took the footage to the police, they took a report but seemed uninterested in pursuing the case against the brother-in-law of a founding partner at Wilson and Barnes. Could be a misidentification, the officer suggested, and nothing was stolen, so. The implied message was clear. Powerful people get different treatment. Then the anonymous calls started. Middle of the night, blocked numbers. Drop the case if you know what's good for you. Daddy's little girl should have played nice. Some accidents can't be prevented. I changed my number twice. The calls still came. One particularly bad day, I discovered Dad had hired a private investigator to follow me. I spotted the same nondescript sedan outside my apartment 3 days in a row, then again outside Rachel's building when I visited. When I approached the vehicle, the middle-aged man inside didn't even pretend not to be watching me. He simply rolled down his window. Just doing my job, Miss Wilson. Nothing personal. I'd never felt so violated, so vulnerable. The psychological warfare was working. I began checking under my car before driving, varying my routes, limiting my outings. He's trying to break you, Michael warned during our strategy meeting. This is classic intimidation, wearing you down until you give up. And it was almost working. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror, hollow-eyed, tense, hair falling out from stress, looked defeated. I hadn't laughed in months. I'd lost 12 pounds. I jumped at unexpected noises and flinched when my phone rang. One Sunday afternoon, feeling completely lost, I visited Mom's grave for the first time since the funeral. The cemetery was peaceful, birdsong and distant wind chimes, the only sounds as I placed white lilies on her headstone. I don't know if I can do this, Mom, I whispered, tears falling freely. It's too hard. She was a fighter, your mother, came a voice behind me. I turned to find an elderly man in groundskeeper's overalls watching me with kind eyes. George Paxton, he introduced himself. Been tending these grounds for 42 years. Did you know my mother? I asked, wiping my tears. He nodded, leaning on his rake. Oh yes. She came here often in those last months, Tuesdays, like clockwork, always with fresh flowers for her parents' graves. I hadn't known Mom was visiting the cemetery regularly. She'd sit right where you are now, sometimes crying something fierce, he continued. Last time I saw her, about a week before she passed, she said something I remember clear as day. George, she said, sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. His words hit me like a physical blow. That was Mom facing the difficult truth even when it hurt. She'd discovered her husband's crimes, confronted that painful reality, and made arrangements to protect what mattered without seeking vengeance or public exposure. She'd been stronger than I'd ever known. Walking back to my car, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about property or money anymore. This was about truth, about justice, about honoring the strength Mom had shown in her final months. That evening, Michael came over to review our strategy for the upcoming hearing. Our friendship had deepened through this ordeal. He'd become not just my attorney, but a trusted confidant who understood exactly what I was fighting for. You seem different today, he observed as we spread documents across my dining table. I am, I replied. straightening papers with newfound determination. I'm done being afraid. Mom faced harder truths than I have, and she didn't break. Neither will I. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same quiet courage Mom had shown. I paused our legal discussion briefly to look out the window, feeling a moment of connection with all of you who've ever faced betrayal from someone you loved. Family estrangement is its own unique grief. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was supposed to protect you? I promise to finish this story, but if you're finding it valuable, subscribing to this channel helps more people discover these difficult family truth stories. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these battles is the only thing that keeps us going. As our court date approached, Dad's team began filing additional motions for summary judgment, to exclude evidence, to expedite proceedings, anything to maintain pressure and deplete my resources. Each required response, research, and billable hours. Then came an unexpected development. I received a call from the Boston Historical Preservation Society. Miss Wilson, we've heard troubling rumors about development plans for Willow Creek, said Eleanor Vanderbilt, the Society's elderly but formidable president. Several historical properties in your region have recently been demolished for luxury condominium projects. My stomach dropped. What have you heard specifically? An architectural firm specializing in multi-unit luxury developments has been contracted for preliminary surveys of the property, she explained. Wilson Creek Holdings LLC is listed as the client. I'd never heard of this company, but the Wilson made it obvious. I did some digging and discovered Wilson Creek Holdings had been incorporated 3 months after Mom's death, with Bethany listed as the primary officer. They weren't just fighting for the property, they were already planning to destroy it. The Boston Globe ran a small article the following week. Family dispute threatens historic property. The piece quoted sources close to the family saying the estate had fallen into disrepair and required significant modernization. It painted Dad as the responsible steward, seeking to preserve the property's value against my emotional attachment to an unsustainable past. I recognized Dad's media manipulation tactics. He'd always been skilled at shaping narratives for difficult clients. Then came the most surprising twist yet, a call from William Barnes, Dad's longtime partner at the firm. Amanda, I need to speak with you. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Not over the phone. Tonight, 8 o'clock, Cambridge Hospital parking garage. Lower level. It sounded like something from a spy movie. Why would I? It's about your father's financial records, he interrupted. Come alone. The parking garage was nearly empty when I arrived. William's Mercedes was parked in a dim corner, engine off. I pulled up beside it, heart pounding. William was in his 60s, distinguished with silver temples and wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been at every holiday dinner growing up. My honorary uncle who always brought extravagant Christmas gifts and told terrible dad jokes. Thank you for coming, he said, not getting out of his car. I stayed in mine as well, windows down so we could speak. I've been conducting an internal audit at the firm, quietly. Why? Discrepancies in the client trust accounts, he replied, looking around nervously. Significant ones, going back years. My breath caught. And you think my father is involved? It wasn't a question. William removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We've been partners for 30 years, Amanda. I trusted him implicitly. But the numbers don't add up, and James can't explain the inconsistencies. Why are you telling me this? Because he's using firm resources to pursue this case against you, William said. And because Laura was my friend too. If you have evidence of financial impropriety, I need to know before this damages more clients and the firm. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I might have documentation, I said carefully. If it exists, I need to see it. William's voice was strained. Not for the case for the firm's liability assessment. We may be obligated to report to the Bar Association. I need to consult with my attorney before sharing anything, I replied. William nodded. I understand. But Amanda James is desperate. The firm's executive committee is asking questions he can't answer. Be careful. Michael advised against sharing Mom's evidence with the firm. It's our strongest card, he argued. Once it's out, we can't control how it's used. Let's save it for court. I agreed, though I sent William a brief message. Looking into what I can share. Please give me time. Dad's team filed yet another motion, this one seeking to invalidate Mom's updated will entirely, claiming she was heavily medicated and unduly influenced when signing. To my shock, they included an affidavit from Dr. Thomas Reynolds, Mom's primary physician during her illness, suggesting she may have been mentally compromised by pain medication. Michael immediately began investigating. Within days, he discovered that the Laura Wilson Memorial Research Grant had been established at Massachusetts General Hospital 3 months earlier, a $250,000 donation specifically to Dr. Reynolds's cardiac research program, courtesy of the James Wilson Family Foundation. Your father is buying testimony, Michael said grimly as we reviewed the documentation. Not explicitly, of course, just a generous donation honoring his late wife. Is that enough to disqualify the affidavit? I asked. Not automatically, but it creates serious questions about bias. Judge Blackwell won't look kindly on it if we can establish the timeline. The final hearing date was set for exactly 2 weeks later. As Michael and I intensified our preparation, Dad made an unexpected move. A settlement offer delivered by courier to Michael's office. The terms were insulting. Dad would receive 75% ownership of Willow Creek. I would retain 25% as a courtesy, and the agreement included a comprehensive non-disclosure clause, prohibiting me from discussing family disputes publicly or privately. In exchange, he would drop the conservatorship petition and agree not to contest any other aspects of Mom's will. Michael brought it to my apartment that evening. This is actually good news, he said as I read through the offensive document. How is this good? It's a slap in the face. It means they're worried, he explained. Your father wouldn't offer any settlement if he was confident about winning outright. I tore the document in half. Tell him I decline. Dad called within the hour, his voice ice-cold. You're being incredibly foolish, Amanda. I'm honoring Mom's wishes, I replied. Your mother wouldn't want this family destruction. Bethany and I are prepared to be generous despite your behavior. Generous? You're trying to take what isn't yours. That property was maintained with my money for decades, he snapped. Your mother had no right to exclude me. Maybe she had reasons, I suggested, my finger hovering over the record button on my phone. A pause. What's that supposed to mean? Maybe we should discuss the offshore accounts, I said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. You'll regret this for the rest of your life, he said quietly before hanging up. The next day, Bethany posted a photo of herself and Dad on Instagram, captioned, "Standing by my man through difficult times. Mental health issues can run in families, unfortunately. Support system family first." The thinly veiled attack was viewed by all our mutual connections. The comments ranged from confused to concerned to downright nosy. The public smear campaign had begun. Judge Blackwell denied Dad's motion to dismiss the will, setting the stage for our final showdown. With just days remaining before the hearing, Dad's team unleashed a flurry of procedural objections and technical challenges, classic delay tactics from a party seeing their position weakening. As I packed my briefcase the night before court, I realized something had changed within me. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. Mom had faced a devastating truth about the man she loved and found the courage to act with integrity. I could do no less. The morning of our final hearing dawned crisp and clear. I barely slept the night before, reviewing documents and practicing answers to anticipated questions until Rachel confiscated my legal pads at 2 a.m. and ordered me to bed. The courthouse steps were busier than I expected. A small crowd of legal interns and courthouse regulars had gathered, drawn by the prospect of watching James Wilson, legendary attorney, in a family court battle. I spotted a photographer from the Boston Legal Journal snapping pictures as I climbed the steps. Dad and Bethany arrived just as I reached the entrance. He wore his trademark power suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes. His jury suit, he'd always called it. Bethany was dressed conservatively in a cream-colored dress and jacket that had almost certainly come from Mom's favorite designer. James. I nodded as we crossed paths. He looked through me as if I didn't exist. Bethany, however, couldn't resist a performance. She stepped forward, touching my arm with theatrical concern. Amanda, it's not too late to end this amicably, she said, loud enough for the nearby photographer to hear. We're still family. I gently removed her hand. We're really not. Michael was waiting inside, calm and prepared with 2 neat stacks of documents and a confidence that steadied my nerves. Remember, he said quietly, no matter what they say, stay composed. Judge Blackwell notices everything. Courtroom 3B fell silent as Judge Blackwell entered, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. After preliminary matters, she addressed both parties. I've reviewed the filings and exhibits extensively, she began. This case involves serious allegations on both sides. Let's proceed efficiently. Mr. Stevens, present your case. Bradley Stevens approached the podium with practiced ease. For the next 2 hours, he presented Dad's case with polished precision. Mom had been confused and heavily medicated when changing her will. I was emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. Dad had financially supported the property for decades and had legitimate expectation of inheritance. The updated will represented an irrational punishment for his remarriage. The parade of witnesses supporting Dad was impressive. Business associates testified to his impeccable ethics. Former clients praised his trustworthiness. The family doctor discussed Mom's medication regimen with carefully worded statements that implied without directly claiming impairment. The most difficult testimony came from Bethany, who approached the stand with tear-filled eyes and a trembling lip. James has been devastated by this ordeal, she said, dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief I recognized as Mom's. He loved Laura deeply and cared for her until the end. All he's wanted since Amanda's rejection of our marriage is to rebuild a family that honors Laura's memory. Stevens guided her through a narrative, portraying me as unreasonably hostile to their relationship. What happened when you tried to involve Amanda in wedding planning? She refused to even discuss it, Bethany claimed, though she had never once included me in any plans. She said she wouldn't attend under any circumstances. And after the wedding? I tried everything, Bethany sighed dramatically. Invited her to dinners, suggested family counseling, even asked for her input on redecorating, hoping to make her feel included. She rejected every attempt. Each lie built upon the next. According to Bethany's revisionist history, I had an unhealthy attachment to Mom and resented any woman in Dad's life. She even suggested I had manipulated Mom during her illness to change the will out of spite. When Dad took the stand, his performance was masterful. The stern exterior softened as he described his 30-year marriage to my beloved Laura and his grief after her passing. He appeared genuinely pained when discussing the rift with me. Amanda and Laura were exceptionally close, he testified. After we lost Laura, I expected a period of adjustment, but I never imagined Amanda would reject Bethany so completely or fight me over property that Laura and I maintained together for decades. His voice broke convincingly as he added, "This isn't about money or property. It's about preserving what's left of our family. Laura would be heartbroken to see what's happening." During cross-examination, Michael methodically exposed inconsistencies in Dad's timeline. "Mr. Wilson, you testified you were blindsided by your wife's will changes, correct?" "Yes," Dad confirmed. "Laura never indicated any intention to exclude me from her family property. Yet you contested the will less than 24 hours after being notified of its contents," Michael noted. "That's remarkably fast decision-making during a period of shock." Dad's jaw tightened slightly. I recognized immediately that something was wrong. "You also testified that your relationship with Miss Parker began after your wife's death. Is that correct?" "Yes, we grew closer during our shared grief." Michael approached with a document. I have here credit card statements showing you and Miss Parker stayed at the Four Seasons Maui 6 months before Mrs. Wilson's death. Room charges for champagne, couples massage, sunset cruise, business trip, Dad's face flushed. Bethany accompanied me to a legal conference. Interesting. The Bar Association has no record of a conference in Hawaii during that period. Judge Blackwell's expression remained neutral, but I noticed her making extensive notes. When my turn came to testify, I focused on facts rather than emotions, exactly as Michael had advised. I described my relationship with Mom, her decline, and her final days. I explained the safety deposit box key and letter without mentioning the specific contents yet. Mom never said she was excluding Dad from her will, I testified honestly. But she was very clear that Willow Creek should remain in her family line. It was important to her that the property be preserved, not developed. During cross-examination, Stevens tried repeatedly to provoke an emotional response. Isn't it true that you resented your father's professional success? No, I was proud of his career. You became obsessively attached to your mother during her illness, didn't you? I spent time with my dying mother, yes. And you couldn't accept your father finding happiness after her death? I wanted my father to be happy, I replied evenly. I objected to him erasing my mother from our family home and marrying his secretary 2 months after the funeral. Stevens pounced on my momentary show of emotion. So you admit you disapproved of his marriage? I disapproved of the timing and circumstances, yes. And this dispute over property is your way of punishing him for moving on? No, I said firmly. This is about honoring my mother's explicit wishes for her family property. After a short recess, Michael called Helen Parker, who testified about Mom's mental clarity when updating her will and the extensive measures taken to document her competency. In 30 years of estate law practice, I've never seen someone so thorough about establishing their testamentary capacity, Helen stated. Mrs. Wilson was thinking clearly and acting deliberately. Then came the moment we'd prepared for. Michael submitted Mom's documentation as evidence, requesting it be entered under seal due to potentially sensitive information. Dad's attorney objected immediately. Your Honor, this is clearly hearsay evidence from a deceased witness that cannot be cross-examined. Your Honor, Michael countered. These are contemporaneous records maintained by the deceased in the regular course of her affairs, with clear indicia of trustworthiness. They fall squarely within the business records exception to hearsay. Judge Blackwell took the envelope, reviewing its contents carefully, while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Dad leaned over to whisper urgently to Stevens, his expression increasingly agitated. After what seemed like an eternity, Judge Blackwell looked up. I'll allow these documents into evidence. They appear relevant to Mrs. Wilson's state of mind when making testamentary decisions. Dad visibly paled. Michael methodically connected the evidence to our timeline, showing how Mom discovered financial irregularities coinciding with Dad's increased control over her medical decisions and isolation from family friends. These bank records show transfers from client trust accounts to offshore holdings, Michael explained. The dates align perfectly with Mrs. Wilson's increasingly specific estate planning. Dad's urgent whispers to his attorney grew more frantic. Judge Blackwell called both attorneys to the bench for a hushed conference that lasted several minutes. When they returned to their tables, Stevens looked distinctly uncomfortable. Dad appeared ashen. I requested permission to approach the bench for a final statement. Judge Blackwell agreed with a small nod. Standing before her, I could see Dad just a few feet away, his facade of confidence completely gone. Your Honor, I said clearly, I believe trust account 4731 is particularly relevant to understanding my mother's state of mind. The effect was immediate and shocking. Judge Blackwell's face drained of color. Dad made a strangled sound, half rising from his chair before Stevens pulled him back down. This court is in recess, Judge Blackwell announced abruptly, her voice tight. Resume in 1 hour. The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs as the judge exited swiftly through her chamber doors. The recess that followed was chaos. Dad had some kind of physical reaction, whether genuine or performed for sympathy, was unclear, and paramedics were called. I watched from across the courtroom as they checked his blood pressure and administered oxygen, while Bethany hovered dramatically, shooting accusatory glances in my direction. Michael pulled me aside into a conference room. "What just happened in there?" he demanded. The judge looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Trust account 4731, I explained. "It wasn't just a random number in Mom's documents. It was a specific case, the Blackwell settlement." Michael's eyes widened. "Judge Blackwell's husband?" I nodded. "Edward Blackwell died about 8 years ago. Before that, he was injured in a construction accident and received a settlement. Dad's firm handled the case. According to Mom's records, a significant portion of that settlement money was among the funds Dad embezzled." "Jesus Christ," Michael whispered. "Your mother knew the judge would recognize that account number." "Mom was always methodical," I said quietly. "She documented everything, including which specific accounts were affected. She knew exactly what she was doing when she left me that evidence." The conference room door burst open as a court officer entered. "Federal agents have arrived," he announced tersely. "Judge Blackwell has recused herself from the case effective immediately." When we returned to the courtroom, everything had changed. 2 men in dark suits stood near the bailiff's station. Dad was back in his seat, looking demolished, while Stevens conferred urgently with another attorney who had just arrived. Judge Blackwell returned briefly to make a formal statement. "Due to information suggesting a potential conflict of interest, I am recusing myself from this matter effective immediately. The case will be reassigned to Judge Michaels. Additionally," she continued, her voice rigidly controlled, "information presented today indicates possible criminal activity that falls outside this court's jurisdiction. I have notified appropriate authorities who may conduct their own investigation." As she finished speaking, one of the suited men approached Dad's table. I couldn't hear the words exchanged, but I watched as Dad was read his Miranda rights in the middle of the probate court. Bethany began creating a scene, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations directed at me. "You've destroyed our family! Are you happy now?" she shouted across the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, the media had somehow caught wind that something significant was happening. Reporters clustered around the exit, cameras flashing as Dad was escorted to a car not in handcuffs, but clearly in custody. William Barnes arrived just as we were leaving, his expression grim. "I thought you should know," he said quietly, pulling me aside. "The firm has already begun an internal investigation and audit of all client trust accounts. We suspected issues, but could never pin anything down." "How long?" I asked. "How long did we suspect? Or how long was it happening?" "Both." William sighed heavily. "We had concerns for about 3 years. But according to preliminary findings, the misappropriation goes back almost 15 years. The following days passed in a blur of media coverage and legal developments. The Boston Globe ran a front-page story, "Prominent attorney James Wilson under investigation for client fund misappropriation." Smaller headlines noted the related estate dispute. Dad's firm issued a carefully worded statement announcing a comprehensive audit and promising to make all clients whole. Reading between the lines, they were distancing themselves from Dad as quickly as possible. Bethany filed for annulment 5 days after Dad's arrest, claiming she had no knowledge of any financial improprieties and had been deceived regarding the nature of James Wilson's character and affairs. She moved out of the family home, taking what valuables she could carry, including, I later discovered, more of Mom's jewelry. The museum called, offering my position back immediately. "We've been following the case," my director said awkwardly. "We understand now why you needed leave." The Historical Society reached out with a proposed partnership for Willow Creek, suggesting a conservation easement that would preserve the property while allowing limited public educational access. "Your mother actually discussed this with us before her illness," the director revealed. "She was passionate about historical preservation. With the injunction lifted, I visited Willow Creek for the first time since this nightmare began. Walking through the grand old house with its wraparound porch and creaking floorboards felt like coming home. In the master bedroom, I discovered something unexpected. A hidden panel in the closet, concealing a small room filled with boxes. Inside were the family heirlooms and photos Dad had claimed were thrown away. Mom's first edition books. Albums filled with family photographs. Her grandmother's china. She had hidden away our family treasures, protecting them from Dad's purge. At the bottom of one box, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in Mom's handwriting. Unlike the evidence she'd left, this was personal. My darling Amanda, if you're reading this, you've found my secret hiding place. I began moving things here when I realized James might try to erase me after I was gone. I'm sorry I protected him for so many years at the expense of the truth. I told myself I was preserving our family, our reputation, your relationship with your father. Now I see that truth and justice matter more than appearances. I hope you never had to use the evidence I left you. I hope James respected my wishes and your inheritance. But if not, please know that standing for truth, even when painful, is never wrong. Whatever has happened, remember that you are stronger than you know. You are not responsible for your father's choices or their consequences. All my love, now and always, Mom. I sat on the floor of that hidden room, crying for everything lost and found. For the mother who had been braver than I'd ever known. For the father who had betrayed us both. For the family I thought we were, and the painful truth of what we had actually been. Rachel came to stay with me that weekend, helping sort through the recovered treasures. "Are you okay?" she asked, as we unpacked Mom's books in the library. "Not entirely," I admitted, "but I will be. What happens now with your dad?" The question I'd been avoiding. Dad had been released on bail with his passport surrendered. His legal team was negotiating with prosecutors while the firm's audit revealed the full extent of his embezzlement. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me never wants to see him again. Another part still loves him," Rachel finished for me. "Is that terrible? After everything he did?" "It's human," she said simply. Michael called that evening with updates on the estate case. With Dad's criminal issues taking precedence and Judge Michaels reviewing the evidence, the will contest was all but abandoned. Willow Creek would remain mine, as Mom intended. "You know," Michael said hesitantly, "when this all settles down, maybe we could have dinner sometime, not to discuss the case." Despite everything, I found myself smiling for the first time in months. "I'd like that." As we ended the call, I walked onto the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the property that had been in Mom's family for generations. The ancient willows swayed gently in the evening breeze, their branches casting long shadows across the lawn where Mom and I had once played croquet on summer afternoons. In that moment of stillness, I felt Mom's presence not in some mystical sense, but in the legacy of truth and courage she had left behind. Two simple words had changed everything: trust, account. But the real power had been in two different words Mom had embodied: integrity and truth. 6 months passed, seasons changed, and gradually, life found a new rhythm. I split my time between my apartment in Boston and Willow Creek, where the Historical Society helped me begin a careful restoration of the main house. We developed a plan to open portions of the property for educational tours about local colonial history, using the proceeds to establish a scholarship in Mom's name at the state university. Dad accepted a plea deal, 7 years in federal prison, disbarment, and full restitution to all affected clients. The firm's insurance covered most client losses, but Dad's assets were liquidated to repay the rest. The family home where I grew up was sold at auction to help satisfy the judgments against him. After much soul-searching, I decided to visit him once before his sentencing. The county detention center was sterile and depressing: beige walls, metal detectors, the smell of industrial cleaner barely masking deeper unpleasantness. Dad looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, the commanding presence reduced to an aging man with slumped shoulders. We sat across from each other at a scarred metal table, awkward silence stretching between us. "You look well," he finally said, his voice rougher than I remembered. Thank you for agreeing to see me, I replied formally. We exchanged stilted pleasantries about my health, the weather, neutral topics that highlighted the enormous void between us. Finally, I asked the question I'd come to ask. Why, Dad? You had everything: successful practice, family, respect. Why risk it all? He stared at his clasped hands for a long moment. It started small, he finally said. One client's account. A temporary borrowing to cover investment losses. I intended to replace it within weeks, but you didn't. No, he admitted. The market turned against me again. So I borrowed from another account to cover the first, then another. For 15 years, I was just shifting money, telling myself I'd fix it eventually. And Mom found out. Pain flashed across his face. 7 years ago, she was organizing my home office and found discrepancies in statements I'd left out. She was, he swallowed hard, devastated, threatened to leave, to report me. I begged her to stay, promised to stop. And I tried, Amanda. For a while. But you didn't stop, I said, not a question. The hole was too deep by then, he whispered. Each year it grew. After your mother's diagnosis, I think she realized she couldn't protect me anymore. Couldn't protect you from the truth either. Did you love Bethany? Or was she just a distraction? Dad's laugh was hollow. Bethany loved what she thought I was: successful, powerful. The moment the facade cracked, she was gone. She took what valuables were left, I told him. Of course she did. He didn't sound surprised. As our visitation time neared its end, Dad looked directly at me for the first time. I'm sorry, Amanda. Not just for the legal battle, but for everything. For betraying your mother's trust. For trying to control you. For being a hypocrite about integrity while living a lie. The apology felt partial, insufficient for the damage done, but it was something. I don't hate you, I told him honestly. I can't forgive you yet, maybe not ever completely, but I don't hate you. As I stood to leave, Dad asked, Will you come again? I don't know, I answered truthfully. I need time. Walking away, I realized I was neither forgiving nor condemning him. I was simply moving forward with my own life, carrying both the good and terrible truths about my father. That spring, Rachel held her wedding at Willow Creek, bringing joy back to the property. Watching her dance with her new husband under string lights on the lawn, surrounded by friends celebrating love and new beginnings, I felt healing begin to take root. My relationship with Michael evolved gradually from attorney-client to friendship to something deeper. He understood the complicated grief I carried not just for Mom, but for the father and family I thought I had. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give. In Mom's bedroom at Willow Creek, I discovered a collection of journals spanning decades. Reading them provided new insights into her strength and struggles. She had suspected Dad's financial issues long before discovering concrete evidence. She'd grappled with the moral questions of staying silent, protecting family reputation, versus exposing wrongdoing. Her final journal entry, dated just weeks before her death, read, I hope Amanda never needs the evidence I've gathered. But if James forces her hand, I know she'll find the strength to stand for truth, even when it hurts. That's who she's always been. Clients from Dad's firm occasionally reached out with unexpected gratitude. If you hadn't exposed what was happening, we might never have known what happened to our settlement, said one elderly woman whose late husband's workplace injury compensation had been among the embezzled funds. Thank you for having the courage to bring this to light. I gradually returned to full-time work at the museum, finding renewed purpose in authenticating historical documents. The irony wasn't lost on me. My professional expertise in verifying authenticity had ultimately saved my inheritance and exposed the truth about Dad. One evening in early autumn, Michael and I sat on Willow Creek's porch, watching fireflies rise from the lawn as dusk settled. We'd been dating officially for 2 months, taking things slowly, building something I hoped was as authentic as it felt. I have something to ask you, he said, suddenly serious. It might be too soon, but after everything we've been through together. He knelt beside my chair, producing a small velvet box with a vintage emerald ring, inside nothing like the massive diamond Dad had given Bethany. This was my grandmother's, he explained. Amanda Wilson, would you consider building a new family with me? One based on truth from the beginning? The unexpectedness of it made me laugh, even as tears formed. Yes, I heard myself say. Yes, I would. Later that evening, I walked alone to Mom's favorite bench overlooking the pond. The moon cast silver light across the water as I sat in contemplative silence. The journey from betrayal to rebuilding had been brutal, transformative, necessary. I thought about the thousands of decisions that had led to this moment: Mom's choice to protect Dad for years, then to prepare for the truth. Dad's choice to break trust repeatedly, my choice to fight when it would have been easier to surrender. In the end, the most important legacy Mom left wasn't Willow Creek or material possessions. It was the understanding that truth matters more than comfortable lies, that integrity isn't situational, and that sometimes the hardest path is the only one that allows us to live authentically. Those 2 words in the courtroom trust account had changed everything. But the 2 words that truly freed me came later. I'm free. Free from pretending our family was perfect. Free from the burden of keeping up appearances. Free to build something real on foundations of truth. I hope my story resonates with those of you who face difficult family truths or betrayals by those who should have protected you. Sometimes family karma comes in unexpected ways. Has someone in your family ever forced you to choose between peace and truth? What did you choose, and how did it change you? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feeling alone in their family struggles. If this story touched you, please subscribe to hear more real-life family dramas and the lessons they teach us. Like this video if you believe in standing up for truth, even when it hurts. Share with someone who might need courage in their own family battles. Thank you for witnessing my journey from betrayal to rebuilding. Sometimes our greatest strength comes from surviving the truths we never wanted to face.